Hey guys, my name is Mahi and I'm one of the Alpha 1 coaching college tutors, and today we'll be revising over the 2022 Selective High School Placement Test. In this video, we will be focusing on the writing part of the examination. Before we dive into the specific 2022 stimulus for writing, let's have a brief discussion about the characteristics of the writing examination. The writing test consists of a certain topic which students must write according to the instructions. It assesses creativity of ideas and the ability to effectively write for a purpose or audience. It also assesses grammar, punctuation, spelling, and vocabulary, and it's important to note that this exam is 30 minutes long. Now, let's have a look at the 2022 writing stimulus. The first thing to note is that our task is set in the future. Imagine the date is July 19th, 2099. Write a diary entry of someone your own age who is living in the future. Use the sentence below to start your diary. Dear diary, when our house robot woke me up with its loud singing, I remembered that ... It has also provided some interesting and futuristic details that we could include in our piece of writing, such as technology, ways to travel, home, and social life. The reason I highlighted in the future is because this provides a setting. Now we know exactly when our writing is taking place. The second thing I highlighted was diary entry because this indicates the type of writing that we will be using for this piece. And the last thing I highlighted was to use the sentence below to start your diary because the selective markers are looking if you're writing according to the instructions that they provide. So now let's elaborate on the theory of how we are going to write our diary entry. The purpose and aim of a diary entry is to recount events from a specific day from the persona's perspective. They are a private reflection of the persona's thoughts and emotions about the day's events, meant to be read by the author only. The way they are written depends greatly on the topic. An entry written by a young child might consist of simpler language and tackle simpler topics, while an entry written from a business professional is likely written in a more complex manner and discuss heavier topics and emotions. The structure of a diary entry is similar of that to a recount, meaning that it is generally written in chronological order. This means that the order of events are written as they happened, so generally from the oldest to the most recent event. The overall structure of a diary entry is introduction, body paragraphs, and conclusion. For a diary, our introduction always begins with a date and a greeting, for example, Dear Diary, and also provides a brief overall review of the day's events. It gives the reader a general impression of how you were feeling following those events. Because it is a brief and overall review, our introduction should only be 20% of our entire writing. However, it is still important to mention overall emotions and feelings of the events that we discuss. Moving on to body paragraphs, there is no rule on the number of body paragraphs in a diary entry. The contents of your body paragraphs rely on the events being written about, and while it is up to you, you may find it helpful to pick 3 to 4 main events that occurred that day and focus on one event for each body paragraph. The reason we only pick 3 to 4 main events is because it helps us with time management. You have to remember the writing test is only 30 minutes long, and therefore you have to use your time wisely to write as much detail as you can. Now, in each of those paragraphs, you should describe the event followed by your personal feelings and thoughts about that event. Try to include who was involved, what happened, when did it take place, where did it take place, why did it happen, and how. Or, in short, your 5 W's and 1 H. As I mentioned before, in general, your body paragraphs should follow chronological order, the first paragraph for the earliest event and the last for the latest. And each paragraph should begin by recounting the event, then exploring your feelings, thoughts about what had taken place. In a diary entry, your body paragraphs are going to be the largest component of your piece, so your whole writing should consist of 70% of body paragraphs. And finally, let's discuss our conclusion. In a diary entry, the conclusion focuses on how the events affected you and how they will continue to affect you moving on forwards. For example, how will they affect you now and into the future? What have you learned? And how did you feel about the day's events? Now, the conclusion is a summary, so you do not have to explain in detail what you've learned from the experience and how you felt. And that's why it should only consist of 10% of your entire writing piece. Some specific writing features that a diary entry would have is that it is in first person and also casual because it is personal. It is unrealistic that someone addressed to themselves formally, and it also includes consistent references to your feelings, emotions, and reactions to the day's events. You also have to ensure that the contents of the diary is consistent with the author of the entry. Most of the time, rather than it being you, the topic will specify a type of author. For example, salesman, after a hard day of work, student at a new school, etc. It is important the way the diary is written because it reflects the identity of you. When you're writing in first person, you're writing as if they're your own thoughts. So you write with the language I, myself, and me. When choosing the correct language choices, you could choose to make the tone of your piece more formal or more colloquial. Colloquial meaning just more casual, depending on who you are as the persona. Now, after thorough discussion of the structure of the diary entry, let's plan for the specific stimulus of the 2022 selective writing test. For this stimulus, we're already given the date, which is July 19th, 2099, or in the future, so we don't have to worry about that for now. Now let's discuss the brief background information of our event. I've quickly just drafted a brief overview and some background information about the events that will be taking place in my story. So today it's my 10th birthday, and my parents are intergalactic agents who cannot be present. My house robot helped me try find ways to make my birthday better. So the first thing I wrote was that it was my 10th birthday, which establishes the identity of my persona. Because we know she is 10, we know that the language we will use in our piece is going to be more informal and colloquial. The reason I mentioned that my parents were intergalactic agents was because this is in line with our futuristic theme, and I also mentioned they cannot be present because this introduces a complication in our story, which further alludes to more emotions. The reason I had my house robot help me try find ways to make the birthday better was because this also inserts a resolution in our writing, which also changes the emotions that the persona must be feeling. When writing a plan for a diary entry or any piece of writing, generally for the body paragraphs, I would write it in dot structure. So let's look at body paragraph 1 and describe our first event. With event 1, I first talk about the boring life of Sarah, who is our persona, with the absence of her parents. I'll then briefly mention the robot Antonio trying to make her feel better. However, there is still a constant reminder that her parents weren't there and it was the worst birthday she ever had. Through this event and talking about her boring life, we still have more detail about our persona's identity. Our robot in this paragraph is also reinstating our futuristic theme. And by the constant reminder that her parents weren't there and it was the worst birthday, our conflict that we previously mentioned in our introduction is once again reinforced. I've also briefly noted the emotions that event 1 would make us feel. So sad because she misses her parents, nostalgic because she's going through old memories that she shared with her parents, and also disappointed despite Antonio's countless efforts to try and make her happy. For my next event, I focused more on Antonio and him trying to make Sarah feel better. I also thought it was a good idea here to mention some futuristic technology such as holograms and also talk about the lack of emotion showed by the robot. So the mention of the holograms and futuristic technology just makes sure that we're still staying on theme. Again, it is really important in each of our paragraphs we relate back to the stimulus given, which is obviously in the future, and as well as talking about the lack of emotions showed by the robot, because this shows contrast between a human just Sarah and artificial intelligence. And when we look into this further, we can also see the underlying message that technology cannot fully replace humans. So overall, the feelings and thoughts of event 2 were very sad. So she was very upset. And I thought I would also include that she was very excited and then maybe she got suddenly disappointed again. It was very dismal and she was also disheartened, again, with the memory of her parents, as well as Antonio trying to make things better, but unfortunately failing. And last but not least, we had event 3, which acted as our resolution, where Antonio tries to help one more time and takes Sarah to the park. She meets other children, gets to go outside and have a change of scenery. She still misses her parents, but she still has an awesome time. So once again, this paragraph reinforces that technology cannot replace humans. Through the park, we are introduced to a very different setting compared to the futuristic setting we previously had. She meets other children, and this is the first time she's had human interaction in this entire text, as well as the change of scenery shows character development and change in Sarah's attitudes. Even though she still misses her parents, she still had an awesome time, once again showing this character development. And of course, our resolution in event 3 made Sarah feel hopeful as Antonio tries one last time to make her birthday better, intrigued at the idea of the park, ecstatic when she is finally outside and interacting with children, positive because although she still misses her parents, she still had fun and a good time, and overall really happy. And finally, after all this planning and writing, let's put this piece together and see it in its full form. So now let's analyze my piece of writing. So we first started with highlighting the prompt. Dear Diary, when a house robot woke me up with its loud singing, I remembered that. It has been 1 month, 2 weeks, and 3 days since I'd seen my parents. The memories of waking up to the sweet aroma of pancakes wafting into my room, late night movie marathons, and afternoons filled with laughter cascaded through my mind. The technique I used in the line highlighted is called accumulative listing. This shows a variation of length in my sentences, as well as emphasizing of all the memories that Sarah is nostalgic about. My parents and I always made the most fun and unstoppable team. We were always going on the best adventures, but alas, intergalactic security is our Earth's top priority. So off they went on a mission of a lifetime. By mentioning the parents in the third sentence, we are already introduced to these new characters, which we know may play an important role in our story development. Following this, the discussion about intergalactic security also stays in line with our futuristic theme and gives us context about the parents. The past few weeks have been mundane at best. Mentioning the past few weeks have been mundane, we set the initial tone for our story as boring. I was always the renowned daughter of the 3- and 2-time medal recipient intergalactic agents, the girl who more often skipped dinner than an adventure. Now, without them, I feel like I'm just Sarah. So the new parts that I've just highlighted give us a little more context and description about our characters, as well as now having a name for our persona. I wake up to our house robot Antonio, brush my teeth, and ponder the meaning of life, confined to this state-of-the-art smart home with no one in sight. I feel somewhat adjusted to this new dynamic, no matter how drab, but today was different. The next 2 lines that I've highlighted also stay in line with our futuristic theme, as well as introducing us to our new character, Antonio, who will also be a significant part of our story. Although split in 2 paragraphs, this would be our introduction because it gives us context, as well as introducing us to the new characters in our story. My 10th birthday. Not to sound melodramatic, but a child's 10th birthday marks a priceless rite of passage into their tween years, and I was about to spend it alone. So the first sentence was very short, and it does show a variation in sentence length. And the next 2 things that I highlighted also shows my language choice because a 10-year-old girl would be less formal. Antonio tried his best with his usual grandeur arrangement of 2030s hip-hop hits and freshly baked galactic cookies, but I couldn't help yearn for my mom and dad's cheesy birthday song as they parade into my room with cakes and gifts. The brief mention of the 2030s hip-hop hits and the freshly baked galactic cookies once again help us stay on our futuristic theme. I yearned for the action-packed days they would plan, the warm embrace of my mother's arms, and the beautiful stories that she'd tell me at the end of the day. My parents are heroes, and a day like this without them seemed like it would be the worst birthday ever. This paragraph would be the first event of our diary entry. So let's see which of the 5 W's we have answered. We know it's our 10th birthday, so we know when this happened. We also know who was involved, which was Antonio. We also know what happened. And we also know why this happened. And just in this paragraph alone, we have already answered 4 W's. It is also important to mention that at the end of our paragraph, we mention how we feel, and we felt like it would be the worst birthday ever. Antonio saw the tears pooling in my eyes as my mind was flooded with thoughts, and thanks to his latest update, which refined his artificial empathy, he gave me one of those awkward side hugs. Mentioning tears pooling in her eyes also shows feeling. I searched for comfort in his cold metal arm, but it was no use. I opened my eyes, and to my surprise, there stood the most lifelike holographic projections of my parents. I screamed in excitement, but stopped as I realized it was pre-recorded. Even in holographic form, my parents had no time for me today. The lines that I've now highlighted stay in theme with the future, as well as showing us a different aspect of it, such as futuristic technology. The next two green lines also show us another roller coaster of emotions that Sarah faces. And by mentioning that Sarah's parents did not have time for her today, it reinforces our conflict, which is the main problem of our diary entry. This is our event 2. Let's see if we've answered any of our 5 W's or 1 H. By mentioning Antonio, we know who was involved. We know that the tears pooling in her eyes shows what happened. We also know that Antonio gave her an awkward side hug, once again, telling us something that happened. So this would be our what. I searched for comfort in his cold metal arm, once again, showing us what happened. And there stood the most lifelike holographic projections, again answering what. My parents had no time for me today. By mentioning today, we know when it happened, and we know why she's feeling sad and why everything is happening by mentioning that her parents did not have time for her. So once again, we've mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4 different W's. So for the rest of my day, I moped and dragged my dreary self around the house. As I laid on my levitating smart bed, Antonio peered through the opening of the door. What I've highlighted in green shows, again, feelings and emotions of defeat. And what I've highlighted in yellow about the levitating smart bed, again, shows futuristic technology that may be present in the time that we are writing this diary entry. Despite his thus far unsuccessful attempts at cheering me up, I gave him another chance. Then, the most intriguing and unexpected words left his mechanical voice box. By giving Antonio another chance, this shows a sign of hope and the change of tone in our story. Also by highlighting that she found it very intriguing, once again changes the tone of our diary entry and makes it turn into a more positive experience. Before we go on to the next page, it is important to note that this is the beginning of our event 3. So let's see in this part of our paragraph how many of our W's we have answered. So by indicating that it was for the rest of the day, we know when it happened. By saying she moped and dragged her dreary self around the house, we know what happened. As she lay on a levitating smart bed, we know where it happened. Antonio answers who was involved. We know that she was upset because Antonio was unsuccessful at cheering up. So we know that this is why it happened. And she gave him another shot, which is another thing that happened. So by doing this, we have now answered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of our W's. Let's continue on with our event 3. The park is what I thought at the time, considering that the last time I heard a mention of a park was in history class. Antonio revved up Dad's latest addition to his hoverbike collection, the Kessler 3000, since the closest park was so far. So once again, what's highlighted shows how we are staying in line with our theme. So the mention of the park in history class, that shows how far into the future this is set, as well as the hoverbike collection, which shows some futuristic transport that we might see in this time. The thought of the question, the park, also shows us some curiosity, which is another emotion seen in our event 3. Today was my first time at the outskirts of the city. I'd never inhaled such fresh air and met such welcoming, fun kids. Today, I made 4 cool friends and had so much fun on the slides and swings. This was my first time having this much fun without my parents and without some crazy simulated mission on the line. Of course, I miss my mom and dad, but at the end of the day, I had a blast. Before we go on, it is important to note that this is our conclusion. This is also the first time we are introduced to other humans, which seems to be the turning point of our story and shows the shift of how emotions change from sad and disappointed to happy and excited. What I've now highlighted in blue shows the change in emotion and satisfaction with real life interaction rather than technology, as she mentions that she's having so much fun without a crazy stimulated mission on the line. And our last line shows a summary of her final emotions of her having a blast but still missing her mom, and thus shows character development from sad to happy. And like a normal diary entry, we always have a sign off after our conclusion. And with that, this brings us to the conclusion of the writing portion of the 2022 Selective Placement Test. Thank you.